Alright, welcome to your writing tutorial on sensation and perception FRQs. So first of all, we're going to go over both FRQs. I'm going to record them separately, so that if I ask you to watch either one of them, you can only have to watch one or the other. Okay, so we're going to go over what the AP exam said that would have scored a point. Remember that this is right here, what I gave you is only a portion of what was on the AP test. Same thing with this right here. That each of the FRQs are worth 8 points, and to score a point here is 1. So you did half of an FRQ for each, right? And for this one, you only did 3. Okay, so in the first prompt, we're going to focus on this first one where it's looking at the pair of terms. So looking at 2 terms, and explain how the placement or location of the first influences the processes indicated by the second. So it's very important to take heed of the prompt. Remember, we talked about in class, we're going to DACE. I'm going to show you why in a second, but we're going to define and then apply. You're going to connect if necessary. If they asked you to, like in this one where it says to connect the first to the second, and then extend. Okay, so for all of these, we're going to look at how the first one influences the second one. So where this is located influences on the second one. Okay, so I'm going to show you the AP released scoring guide and some general guidelines that they have. Okay, so here's the scoring guide. Now remember, here's a list of all 8 terms, right? Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm sorry, so 7 points would be this short answer. So I didn't have you do all these. I only had you do 4, right? So we did not do motor cortex and body movement. We did serotonin, we did rods, we did retinal disparity, but we did not do the presence of others. Okay, so I just had you do these 4. So those are the 4 that we are going to focus on. Okay, so let's look at their general considerations for what they scored for question 2. It says answers must be presented in sentences, and sentences must be cognate enough for students' meaning to be apparent. You don't want them to be guessing what you were trying to write. Spelling and grammatical mistakes do not reduce your students' scores, but spelling must be sufficiently accurate so that the reader is convinced that the intended word. Number 2, do not score students' notes made in the section of questions. Score only what has been written in the blanks provided, okay? Within a point, students will not be penalized for misinformation unless it directly contradicts correct information, all right? So, when I want you guys to write, I want you guys to write in sentences. You need to make sure that you're addressing the prompt. You need to write in the blanks provided, not in the question. And you can put a ton of information, but don't ever directly contradict yourself. Remember, we also talked about KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. All right, so dumb it down to the point where someone who didn't know would be able to read it, and keep it simple. All right, so let's look at rods versus peripheral. If you scored a point for that, it says rods are located away from the center of the retina. So away from the center of the retina, this is their location. And the term retina is not required and are responsible for peripheral visions. So they're located apart from it, okay? So note, students must specify the placement of the rods in the eye. So retina indicated the eye, all right? They may not simply say rods are in the periphery without referring to the periphery as being in the eye or the retina. So in location, it's not only talking about, you probably jumped to your brain saying that it's in the outside of the retina, but make sure you said eye. Okay? Students must use the term peripheral vision or describe peripheral vision, outside edges of the visual field. It is not enough to merely say that rods allow us to detect movement and see light because the question specifies peripheral vision. Okay, so if you would have just defined rods, that would not have scored a point. This is where we told you to, remember I said to apply it to the question and then make connections. So you needed to apply and connect. Okay, so an example score. Rods are on the side of the eye producing peripheral vision. Simple. Do not score. rods on the edge of the pupil allow for peripheral vision because rods are not located in the pupil. So see how we tried to get too specific here, and this ended up being wrong, okay? That's saying the eye was general enough to get credit. All right, let's move on to point number 2 in your notes. This was for the AP, so point number 2. Serotonin, so how does the location of serotonin have an effect on reduction of depression? Let's look at what's scored. So increased serotonin in the brain, any part of the brain, even if inaccurate, all right? So you just had to say the brain, or in neuron-related locations. So you could have said synapse, you could have said receptors, neurons, neural pathways, or nervous system reduces depression, okay? So a lack would increase depression. So let's say notes. Students must indicate that the increase of serotonin reduces depression. Students may also say that this theory has been questioned by recent research, but the original theory must be explained. Referring to reuptake can score only if acceptable location of this process is offered within the answers. Students may not indicate that serotonin is a substance originating outside of the body. All right, so look at all this stuff that didn't score. All right, so an example score would say more brain serotonin leads to less depression. Wow, that's pretty simple. More serotonin in the brain leads to less depression. Do not score, more serotonin in the body reduces depression, because no acceptable location has been identified. So see how their location in the body, so it had to say in the brain. It could have also said in synaptic clefts. All right, so it asked you for any location. Okay, point number 4, retinal disparity and depth perception. Any of the following are acceptable responses. Each eye sees a slightly different view, which facilitates perception of depth, distance in 3 dimensions. So this is my location of each eye, right? So that's the location. Location or separation of the 2 eyes facilitates depth perception, so that the location of my eyes allows depth perception. 2 slightly different images of an object facilitate depth perception, or retinal disparity provides binocular cues that facilitate. So any of that could score, be a point. All right, here's an example of a score. Distance between the eye creates 2 different images needed for good depth perception. Do not score. Retinal disparity, which helps depth perception, occurs in the brain because the response does not refer to the eye. All right, so when it's talking about location, it wanted you to actually put the location of the eye. All right, and then point number 4 was a little different because we talked about that you could use any sense. So how does proximity affect or have an effect on the placement of the section, which is perception? So students must indicate an understanding of proximity and its impact on a specific perceptual process. So pathways could include near versus far objects for sound, affect perception of a specific quality. When objects, people, or sounds are close to each other, we perceive a whole or gestalt. People or objects in close proximity to the observer are perceived more positively over time from mere exposure. So this one we actually haven't gone over yet. Okay, so score. When you look at a bunch of trees, the ones that are smaller and blurrier will seem to be farther from you. So this would be vision. If you see the same person over and over again, like in your class, after a while you start to like them. We have not talked about this yet. Do not score. If objects have proximity, it affects perception. All right? An understanding of proximity is not indicated. So if you would have DACE this one, so if you define proximity is the distance of an object to a person. All right, now I'm going to apply proximity to what? Perception, how I'm perceiving. So what I want to do, maybe I want to do sound, okay? So humans perceive, or maybe I'm going to do vision, sorry. Objects to be different sizes at different distances. I'm going to connect the two. Objects closer, remember, so this talked about distance, appear larger, and objects farther appear smaller. All right, so we perceive, so now I'm going to connect the two or extend. We perceive objects farther away as smaller, and we perceive objects that are closer to us as larger. Okay, so see how I actually put way too much information here, but I never contradicted myself. I definitely defined proximity. I put perception in there, and I identified a sense that it connects to. Right, so I said sight. You could have talked about sound, any one of those things. So if you have questions on the sense that you used and whether or not it would score, you could come talk to me. But at this point, I'd like to give yourself a score and write some notes about what you possibly might do different next time. And then we'll do our other FRQ as a separate grading.